Good afternoon, folks. We have a slight delay where we have some audiovisual issues, and we'll hopefully correct those very shortly, and we'll get started. So just stand by. Thank you. I think Deputy Mayor will buy the first round of coffee while we're waiting. How's that? All right, good afternoon, folks. We are now ready to start. The delay wasn't too bad after all. I'm Tony Mancini, and welcome to the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee. It's April the 6th, and we are about 2 minutes after 1 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting to order. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Mi'kmaq people, and that we are all treaty people. We're going to begin today's meeting with an election of the chair and vice chair. Once a year, we look at all our standing committees, and so I'm going to hand this over to Katie, and she's going to lead us off for nominations for chair.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So we're going to start off with the nominations of chair and vice chair, and anyone can be nominated on the committee, and every nomination requires a mover and seconder. So I'll open the floor to nominations. Awesome. So nomination for Councillor Mancini was moved and seconded. Is there any other people that would like to put their name forward for chair? For the second time? For the third time? Nope. Okay, so Councillor Mancini is now the chair again.
Yeah, she said again, that wasn't a very enthusiastic again, but thank you, Katie. Thank you, colleagues. I truly appreciate that. It is an honor to chair this committee. We'll carry on with the election. Call for nominations for vice chair. Do we have anybody who would like to nominate somebody for vice chair?
I'll nominate Councillor Daigle-Gammon, please.
Councillor Morris nominates Kathy Daigle-Gammon, seconded by Councillor Lovelace. Do we have any other nominations? Any other nominations for vice chair? Last call. Any other nominations for vice chair? Saying that, Councillor Daigle-Gammon, do you accept the nomination for vice chair? Well, thank you very much. We'll let you know the vice chair's role tonight when we go to the special place, when we celebrate Tartan Day, what you're required to do this evening, right? That's great. Councillor Morris, thank you very much for your role in vice chair. Truly appreciated. All right, let's get moving to the rest of the agenda. Thank you all. First of all is approval of minutes from December the 1st. Moved by Deputy Mayor, second by Councillor Daigle-Gammon. All in favor? We do have approved minutes. Approval of order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Madam Clerk?
There are no additions or deletions from the clerk's office.
Anything from the committee? The only thing I may suggest is that maybe we could do public consultation before we go in camera, if that's okay with everybody. All right, so that's the only change that we made. Great, thank you. So we have someone move the order of business then? By Councillor Lovelace moved, seconded by Councillor Morris. All in favor? We now have an agenda. Business arising out of the minutes. Seeing none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Seeing none. And then we have motions of reconsideration, motions of rescission, consideration of deferred business, notice of table matters, all none. Madam Clerk, are there any correspondence or petitions?
No correspondence or petitions received from the clerk's office.
Thank you. Any from the committee? Seeing none. We are now coming time for presentations, and we have two presentations today. First one is the 10.3.1, the Backlands Coalition, and after that will be 10.3.2, Clean Energy Pilot. So first of all, the folks from the Backlands Coalition, please come forward. So we have Dr. Warm and Dr. Karskallen, is that correct? Yeah, and welcome to both of you. Welcome to City Hall, and welcome to the Environment and Sustainability Committee. You have 10 minutes, and when your time is just about up, Katie will show you our high-tech technology. You'll notice 30 seconds left, and then if you get the red one, and then after that, you don't want to see what's going to come next. So welcome to both of you. We truly appreciate you being here. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. After your presentation, the committee is they're permitted to ask questions and clarifying questions. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, dear councillors, for hearing us from the Backlands Coalition today. It's our pleasure to present on the importance of the backlands to our community, to HRM and to Nova Scotia. Can you see our slides? Yeah, you can. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of background about the Backlands Coalition, we're a large coalition of local citizens and non-governmental groups. We have a mission to prevent loss of further wildlife habitat from the backlands and to preserve the backlands for their natural, historical, cultural conservation, educational, and recreational value. So it's both for nature and people, and we recognize that Halifax, under the Green Network Plan and the Halifax program, aligns with these objectives very strongly, and we just want to draw attention to this particular part of wilderness right in our backyard. It's actually the closest wilderness to the largest urban center in Eastern Canada, and as such, we think it deserves special recognition. Just a little bit about who we are. So we are 10 different associations that have formed the Backlands Coalition. You can see them listed here. We had a letter writing campaign last year about further protecting the backlands and recognizing their integrity and importance that gathered over 1,500 signatures from local residents. We're part of the HRM Alliance, and as such, we are closely aligned with the goal of building a sustainable city and becoming a sustainability leader in Canada and around the world. And we think that protecting the backlands and maintaining their integrity and their value aligns with that mission of the HRM Alliance and, in fact, HRM as a whole. A little bit of background on the backlands in case you are one of the few people who haven't been hiking back there. It's on the Chiboucto Peninsula, just off the Rotary, so it's very, very close. It's a 5-minute drive from here. District 11, it borders the community of Spryfield, Williams Lake, Purcell's Cove, Ferguson's Cove, where I live, and my co-presenter, Mother, lives in Purcell's Cove. Also Herring Cove, Green Acres. It's home to one of the newest parks in Canada, in HRM, the Shaw Wilderness Park, and it's also home to the McIntosh Run watercourse, which of course is being developed, one could say, very carefully by the McIntosh Run Trail Association to further its value for people to visit. On the ecological side, so I'm a biologist, I should have mentioned that. I'm a professor of conservation biology at Dell, have taught conservation biology there for over 20 years, and I'm very passionate about some of the lands and waters of conservation value right here in our HRM area. And this area particularly stands out for the so-called Jack Pine Broom Crowberry Barrens, which is a globally rare ecosystem, which even in Nova Scotia is quite rare, but it's globally unique to our region, and it's very prevalent in this parcel of land. And from an ecological standpoint, that's one of the reasons why we want to see it protected. It is kind of network of different land holdings. There's HRM Parkland in there, particularly the Shaw Wilderness Park, which is a partnership with Nature Conservancy. There's HRM Protected Lands. There's Nova Scotia Nature Trust lands. We had a celebration last month in Purcell's Cove. More than 100 people came to it. We were quite overwhelmed by the support to celebrate some of the families who have donated land for this cause to the Nature Trust and to build integrity across this landscape that you see outlined here in green. You also see the brown areas, which is privately owned areas or development areas that are kind of eating away at this parcel of wilderness, and we are concerned that we're losing opportunities here to protect the integrity of this area, its recreational value, and the wildlife corridors that are quickly closing due to development that connected to the Herring Cove backlands, but also to Long Pond Provincial Park, and then on to the Terrence Bay Wilderness. So this is still a functional wilderness with a lot of threatened species, which we will talk about right here. So there's mainland moose here, which of course is an endangered species. There is the broom crowberry jack pine habitat that I mentioned. It's a fire-resistant, fire-dependent ecosystem. We'll talk what that means for development in a second. We have nesting snapping turtles, another endangered species. We have nightjars and other threatened birds. So it's a high biodiversity area right here in our backyard. From a people point of view, it's overwhelming how much people have flocked into this area. I think this is a positive overall. A lot of people are aware now of the value of this area. The McIntosh Run Watershed Association has been very active in building trails here, single-track trails that maintain the ecological integrity of the park. They spent over 12,500 volunteer hours since 2016, all unpaid. They attracted significant funding from local donors, and in 2021 they ran a visitor survey which documented that on average 1 in 4 Haligonians had used that area that year. That's a 300% increase from pre-pandemic levels, and it shows how important this area was for locally accessible recreation and mental health and physical health benefits, quite frankly, during that difficult time. And the survey really, really highlighted that, and it really highlighted to all of us what a jewel this is right in our backyard. So I'll give over to my co-presenter.
Thanks very much, Boris. So just really quickly, my background's similar to Boris. I started out doing a PhD in ecology, looking at the disturbances on ecosystems, although unlike Boris, I went over to the dark side, which was the private sector. So for the past 15 years, I've been building companies and running them throughout North America and Southeast Asia. I now own several companies, including everything from sustainable biomanufacturing to advanced analytics, as well as a housing development company in the area here in the HRM. So thanks, Boris, for going over kind of the societal benefits of the area, and as well as the potential risks from an ecological standpoint. So I wanted to just take a second to talk a little bit more about the logistics of if we were to actually develop this area and what that would do from an ecological standpoint. So as you guys will probably see on the picture on the left, which maybe you're familiar with, maybe you're not, the Backlands is not necessarily a dense forest, but is a rolling land with a lot of bedrock. It is probably as far from flat as you can imagine, even if you're looking at it on a small area. What this means is that if you were to actually allow development in the region, this would require an immense amount of blasting, drilling, and hammering in order to level the bedrock out to create sustainable grade terrain that would actually allow you to put in a road or housing. Now, in addition to the impact of just the pain in the butt sound pollution that would be created from this, not just on the short term, but on the long term, not just for the surrounding communities, but also from the ecological standpoint. When you blast and drill granite, you're going to create an immense amount of fine particulate matter, which is going to run off as a silt. So every time it rains, that's going to collect in all the waterways, whether that be a lake, river, stream, or pond. As you can imagine, a large enough volume of that further threatens the local ecosystems, both from a plant and animal perspective. The other image on this is on the right side of the screen, which again, some of you might recognize, but it was the fire back in 2009. That thing ripped through the Backlands pretty harshly, destroying about 60% of it. So it was about 800 hectares of land that was consumed by the fires. Thankfully, only a few homes were damaged. I think 8 or 9 homes were damaged at that time. This fire, though, was not a one-time occurrence, so it's been shown, and Boris kind of alluded to it, the fact that we have local species that are dependent on fires for releasing their seeds, like the jack pines. So this is an area that gets subjected to fires time and time again over the years. So not only if we develop that area are we threatening the fauna that are specific to this area and rare around the world, but we're also introducing an unnecessary risk to the people that then call that area home, right? So if you create a neighborhood in an area that's fire prone, that's just risk that we just don't need at all. In addition to that, the HRM has been speaking about the Halifax Green Network Plan for a few years now, where at its core is focused on maintaining important ecological and cultural land and aquatic ecosystems. And if that is not the definition of what the backlands is, I have no idea what is. Protecting the backlands aligns directly with just the core focus of the actual Green Network Plan. Although there are a few small, green patches throughout the HRM, as Boris said earlier, it's probably one of the largest and most easily accessible green spaces that's incredibly important from a societal, a cultural, and an ecological standpoint. So last but not least, if we don't stop the rapid development that's encroaching on the backlands pretty much from all sides, we are going to start cutting off key wildlife corridors. And in order to protect that, we need to recognize the backlands as a foundational part of the Green Network Plan. In addition to that, we're asking that the HRM develop adequate zoning in the municipal bylaws that protects this land both in the short term and the long term. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation, gentlemen. Full disclosure, that McIntosh Run picture, I think I'm actually in it. I'm an avid mountain biker, and I've spent a lot of time in McIntosh Run, and the folks in Marwa are amazing. It's a perfect example of what we can do when communities come together and work with the orders of government. I mean, the province was heavily involved, along with the municipality, and so maybe I'll get the local councillor this summer, or maybe even sooner, to take me for a little private voyage, and we can truck through the trails back there. So thank you both for the presentation. Let's see, we have, well, speaking of the local councillor, Councillor Cudley, you'd like to ask some questions? You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to thank all the residents who are here in the gallery today, and to Mather and Boris for your presentation. The Purcell's Cove Backlands are a really precious place. I was going to say with recreation. I know Councillor Mancini has been there, and so have residents from actually all across the municipality. Whenever I'm back there, I do little surveys when I bump into people and ask them where they're from, and run into residents from your district and from Dartmouth and from Sackville and beyond, New Brunswick, Quebec. And the last time I was there, I ran into a whole group of international students from around the world. So, it's not just a local resource, it is a regional resource from a recreation point of view. Locally, as was mentioned, it's an important ecological resource. And, it's something that I think we haven't been very good at is kind of delineating our development in terms of, the unique geologies with which we need to work. And what's been happening out in this area is we've been blasting this granite, altering water courses, causing issues on our road infrastructure, flooding on people's properties, and that's all continuing to get worse. And I think we really do need a different approach to how we work with unique geographies, and this one has certainly been noted as a unique geography. I also just want to kind of reassure the residents that staff are working on this. So I know that over the past year through the regional plan review that you've provided staff with tours, that you have been in contact with a number of staff. And so in the regional plan review, the requests around wildlife corridors and the special designation for the backlands have been noted. And I just want to read quickly here that when I asked staff just for an update, just to provide an update on where we are with that, they acknowledge that urban form of service development is no longer envisioned in this location, and consider redesignating and rezoning the remaining privately owned lands currently zoned and designated urban reserve to an alternate designation and zone that recognizes the environmental and cultural importance of the Purcell's Cove Backlands. So that is one of the objectives, and I think that together we can continue to closely work with staff in making sure that what that zoning is kind of reflects the watershed, the environmental, the ecological needs of the area. And in terms of wildlife corridors, as you know, we've recently approved the budget, and in the budget we have the Halifax, we hired a coordinator for the Halifax Green Network Plan, which I think is critically important. And we've also put money towards the suburban and rural plans, which is also critically important because that work is long overdue. And if that had been done previously, I think a lot of the encroachment that is already approved along the Herring Cove Road wouldn't be in the form that it is. But a lot of that can't be undone. It's a done deal. So I think the urgency now of looking at what wildlife corridors can be preserved is more critical than ever, because it's a very big concern of mine about looking at the Herring Cove Road there. When you have the Purcell's Cove backland and their environmental relationship to what happens on the interior of the Chebucto Peninsula, and how that carries on to the Terrace Bay Wilderness Area and Long Lake Provincial Park, to the Western Common, to Birch Mountain, or Birch Lakes, Blue Mountain, Birch Lakes. It's all interconnected, as we know. So it's really important that we get this right. But staff have noted that they're going to develop a regional approach to the protection of natural corridors, and that directs how natural corridors should be delineated at a regional and individual sites. And in here, they also note it prioritizes wildlife connections in the Chebucto Peninsula. So that has been noted by staff, and again, we'll continue to work with staff on ensuring that that's right, because we have for those of us that live in the area, have a special and unique understanding of how things work there. So I hope to continue that engagement and that work together, that collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for acknowledging the work of the Green Network Plan Coordinator and the Wildlife Coordinator. That work, that's corridors, that's extremely important. Councillor Morris was advocating on both those, so congrats to Councillor Morris and her work there, so thank you. Next up, Councillor Lovelace, you have the floor. It's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was pleased to be at the celebration, actually, for the Backlands and celebrating volunteers and sponsors, and it was just a wonderful event to bring everyone together because it has been a lot of work. And when I look at your numbers, 110,000 visitors, that's going to double probably quite soon, right? As more and more people become aware. But also looking at 12,500 volunteer hours, that's really significant. The amount of time that people are actually spending in that land, developing that land, which encourages more and more people to come. So, I got a sense from your presentation that people control is something that needs to be addressed. Certainly with the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes Wilderness Area, that is also a big concern, ensuring that people are not going through that area without having controlled access, understanding the rules of engagement when it comes to wildlife or any flora or fauna, actually. So one question I have for you is, what do you see as far as the municipality assisting in kind of that people control aspect? Because it's not just for the Backlands, it's for all of our wilderness areas that we're considering, both from a legacy perspective, but also to ensure that we're working with the province with regards to that wildlife corridor plan, and also looking at ways that we at the municipality could be doing a better job to help people understand their interaction and impact with wilderness and wildlife.
So you're talking to an educator, and I share that passion, and I think we really have an opportunity here to bring people and nature together in a new way. And there's a huge need. I've previously lived in Duncan's Cove, and we all know what happened there. It was like, over a course of 5 years, there was a tenfold increase at least of visitors, and continues to increase because of the beauty of the area. I think the network plan is helpful in giving people, spreading people out a little bit more and designating more areas, having more areas that have good access, where not everybody is flocking to 2 or 3 areas that are accessible, but we're spreading it out a little bit. And I think that's what's happening at McIntosh Run, and there's more trails now, and people are spread out a little bit more. So that's one thing. Right. The other one is education, I think, and having good signage, and actually educating people about what it is that they're seeing, and what it is that they're interacting with, and what's a proper way of using that area, what's an improper way of. There's a really good education opportunity, and we're not using it hardly in any of our parks, save the national parks, I think.
Right.
How do you interact with wildlife when you see it, right? For example, how do you interact, trail etiquette, for example, things like that, I think is something we really need to think about. But I think the answer to the huge demand of people for green spaces is to designate more green spaces. We can't keep people out, but we can spread them out intelligently, and we can tell them, or engage them more so, on how to properly use those areas.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, thank you. I think we do have a lot to learn from Parks Canada in particular, which is what's so exciting about the National Urban Park, to be able to have that strong partnership and potentially use some of the templates they have to educate the public, but also to educate ourselves as well, as far as what is working and what's not working, to create that behavior change, to ensure people are bringing their garbage out and not leaving it along the trail, for example. Thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, Councillor Morris, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our presenters for being here today and for bringing these concerns forward. I think there's a lot more conversation and dialogue needed. I think we are making progress through the regional plan on getting more protection for this area and for other special natural areas around Halifax. I was kind of intrigued by this idea of being the closest wilderness to the largest urban areas. So this is kind of a new thing to talk about nature in urban areas. And I think we have so much more to learn from each other and to do in terms of our zoning and our urban planning to try to figure out how we actually make this work. I don't think that our wetlands protection, which is provincial legislation, is strong enough when it comes to urban wetlands, because it's often assumed that we'll fill them in and we'll create a wetland somewhere else using the sort of offsetting principles of this particular development in the city. So we'll create a better one in a rural area. We won't necessarily protect the urban one. So what I'm saying is I don't think we have some of the legislative frameworks in place that we need, and so I hope we'll have more dialogue and how we might address that in the regional plan. But if you have any comments on how we can sort of address this particular challenge of urban wilderness protection, I'd love to hear a bit about that. And have you identified sort of key actions under the Green Network Plan that you think apply in the situation with the backlands? And are there any practical things that you would suggest when it comes to wildlife in terms of under road passageways or things that we could incorporate? Because we've already gone pretty far in terms of some of the development, but perhaps there is some remediation that we could look at if we knew what the key areas were. So just your thoughts on how we can refine this process of protecting wilderness in near urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for picking up on that point, which I think is a very important one, and it's a novel one, because for the longest time we thought there was people against nature at first, and then people apart from nature, and our national parks reflect that. Nova Scotia's national parks are far away from where most people live. And I think we're changing that paradigm now to people with nature, or people as part of nature, and that requires that people experience, not just on social media, but for real, their place in nature. And that requires access. And the previous councillor made the comment on kind of monitored and managed access. I strongly agree with that, but there needs to be access. And we can't fence people out of wilderness, but we need to reintegrate with our wild spaces. I think particularly in Canada, which very soul, I think, is tied to our wild spaces. Who would we be without our wilderness? And I think people move here because of that. I know the city has a big problem in retaining or attracting skilled workers. People move here for its natural beauty. So even from an economic development standpoint, I think we need it, but we also need it just for our well-being and for whole complete communities, as the HRM Alliance calls it so rightly. So that's my first thought. The second thought, you asked about concrete actions. We think we need a study of how the backlands is connected to other areas via existing corridors, and that these corridors require urgent attention before they close. And I think there's not very many left, just from eyeballing it, but we need a proper study on that. and a study on how we can preserve the integrity of this ecosystem with all the different land holdings. What would be the status of the entire area? Would it be a large park area? What would that look like? Who would manage it? Who would pay for it? I talked to somebody from the province recently who manages provincial parks, and he said he gets queasy when he hears about the backland because it's another area they would have to manage on their tight budget. And I said, well, then we just need to ask to meet that need that is there. We can't just not designate area because we can't manage them. We need to hire people to manage them because we have so many people who demand to have these areas. So that would be my other thought, is a broader vision, not parcel by parcel and chunk by chunk, but for the entirety of the backlands to preserve its integrity and its natural and cultural value. I've recently started talking to the Confederation of Mainland Mi'kmaq and the Mi'kmaq Conservation Group specifically, who have an interest. There has been a suggestion that this could be a so-called reconciliation forest, which is a federal initiative to protect wild spaces as places for reconciliation, particularly in or near urban centers. There's precedents in other provinces, not so far in Nova Scotia. So this is potential funding opportunity, but also something I think that would really enhance its cultural value quite a bit. So those are some thoughts. Mother, do you have anything to add? All good. Were those all the questions, Councillor?
Yes, yes, and more. Thank you. I wasn't aware of the reconciliation forest, so thank you for mentioning that, because I think this is a really important component of the work that we're doing at HRM. There's a lot of discussion going on behind the scenes between HRM and various Indigenous nations, and some of these really constructive and positive projects, like protecting land, can be a really important part of reconciliation. So I look forward to learning more about that and how we could advance that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Vice Chair Daigle-Gammon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation. I will freely admit that I'm playing catch-up on this, so I will be doing all of my homework, but I'm glad you mentioned the reconciliation forest, because I think it was maybe a month ago I remember listening to an interview where in BC, there's a significant area there that they've been able to, one of the nature trusts actually gave the funding, and it's a reconciliation forest, but it is the community that owns the forest kind of thing, and they've set up a pretty interesting governance model, for lack of a better word. So I'm just curious about the percentage of private landowners, and how do you see one of the recommendations about an appropriate zone, reconciling federal land, provincial land, municipal land, and privately owned land, and what do you see as the biggest barrier to how to write a zone? Thanks.
So first of all, thank you for that question. And we've been working with all three levels of government. I should mention that. So Andy Fillmore, Brendan McGuire, and Patty all attended a meeting about 10 months ago where we kind of set this process in motion. And I was buoyed to see a lot of alignment across different levels of government. And Andy Fillmore certainly was interested in leveraging federal funding for an initiative like this, particularly if it has a reconciliation aspect. So that's all happening. What are the barriers? I think what set a lot of this off in the letter writing campaign we had last year was that the current designation urban reserve, which only allows very limited development, was going to change, and there was a fear that it would change to something that would make the private land so valuable that protection would not be possible financially.
Right.
And so I think Patty and the residents and many others have been thinking about what would a new zonation possibly look like. And we have Patricia Emanuel here, who's an urban planner and who has been advising this process. I think it hasn't been set in stone, but the thought is that the current development footprint needs to be preserved in that one house per private lot. Maybe with the restriction has to be within a certain distance of the road, and with incentives for landowners to give conservation easements to the remainder of the land so it can be maintained in its natural value. That's my understanding where the discussion is right now, but it is fluid, and I think the planners are also thinking very actively about that potential new zone that we might need under the Green Network
Okay.
Plan.
And just a quick follow-up, as soon as I listened to myself come back there, it wasn't a forest on the reconciliation, it was under the reconciliation forest, but I think it was a small island. So, just for clarification, thanks.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Cuddle, second time around, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, I just want to kind of follow up on the discussion that's happening here, because it is a really important one. In other provinces, particularly in Ontario, where they've created the green belt, some municipalities have actually created like zoning particular to properties that abut the protected area. And so, I mean, there's plenty of opportunity, I think, for us to look at what does it mean to own private property that is in the green network areas, and how is that developed in a way that is responsive to the environmental uniqueness of those parcels. In this case, with the urban reserve and one home, that's a consideration. The other big impediment is you can't subdivide land right now. You're not allowed to subdivide the land and donate it to conservation, because you can't subdivide for development at all. So I think that's something that perhaps we can go and take and look at CPED about, community planning and economic development around how can we enable the subdivision of land for conservation donation. So I know I've had some conversations about this with Leah, we'll continue to see where that goes. But those are kind of two impediments, particularly, and I don't know what it's like in other areas, but you have some very unique parcels of land here that are very narrow and very, very deep. They go like hundreds of feet. Do you guys have like what's one of those long, skinny pieces of land? Like how far? So, yeah, deep. And so you can't do anything with that land. And so, there is a real desire to create an incentive for people to say, okay, let's subdivide off the backs of our lots and donate it to the Nova Scotia Nature Trust, which has been taking a lot of local land donations, so we can add that to the protected areas. That's just one example of something that we need to figure out.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no others on the board, gentlemen, thank you very much for a very good presentation, very good discussion, colleagues. I do have a suggested action step after this meeting. I think, Councillor Cuddle, could you organize a councillor hike in the backlands? I'll be the first one to sign up.
Absolutely. Hike or bike?
Oh, we can do both, but I may suggest a hike. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I truly appreciate it. All right, folks, next we do have another presentation, 10.3.2 Clean Energy Pilot, Green Quest Power, and the presenter is Kevin Mullen. Kevin, are you with us? There you are. Kevin, welcome to the committee. Let's see, you have 10 minutes, so you have a presentation, I trust, is that correct? Yeah, we'll queue up the presentation. And once that's up, Katie will show you, once again, our high-tech technology of when you're close to ending of your time. Here we go, good. Kevin, welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to say before I get started, it's my first time at City Hall for any reason, and my wife sent me good advice today. She said, no jokes.
She didn't say bring baked goods. That would have been a good suggestion, but next time.
Next
All
time. So I will try to make the most functional presentation I can today, to respecting your time. I'll try to go quick, but I'm a slow talker. So we're here asking for a letter of support from Mayor Savage, indicating the alignment of objectives towards net zero, and also encouraging Nova Scotia to act outside of tradition when beneficial in energy procurement. So that really is, we're trying to help create some political comfort and a sense of alignment between federal, provincial, and municipal government. GreenQuest Power was founded in 2019. I co-founded that because I recognized there was a dysfunction in the energy ecosystem that was slowing down the transition to renewable energy. And so we took on the challenge of modeling, using the best available technology, modeling a solution that could deliver the best clean energy assets, not only in Nova Scotia, but globally. So that was our objective. And I'll try to quickly move through, what the company is about, and then in the last 30 seconds, just kind of outline again why support from HRM is important. So the way we started the company was to model a company. Having done some research, we realized there is wealth in energy industry that is adequate to properly address all stakeholders' concerns. You can hold a hard line on environmental standards, and you can treat your community and Indigenous community with respect, create legacy financial outcomes for them. So you can really do everything on a best case scenario, and it's very uncommon in the energy industry across North America. And so we wanted to come in and do things a little bit differently. Now, I come from a finance background. I had a good career as a early growth stage tech company finance executive, which is kind of difficult space in finance. And modeling is a strength of mine, so I figure out how to do things. And one of the things we always do is fit into the system the way the system works. And unfortunately, in solving this solution, it became clear early on that there would need to be some changes in how the system works in procuring energy if we were going to actually solve the problem. So that is kind of, core to what we're talking about today. So I'll quickly run you through what our solution is, which is geothermal. So when you're trying to create a clean energy technology or a solution that is ideal, what are the things you're looking for? You want to be able to have location flexibility. You want it to be non-intermittent. You want, obviously, no emissions, low environmental impact. You want stability, reliability, small footprint, and you want it to be cost competitive with fossil fuels. Right, and so how does geothermal stack up for that? Well, in the end, after a year and a half of research, that would have been in 2020, we decided on geothermal because it checks literally all the boxes except for location. Right, so right now, if you're building geothermal in a hot zone using new technology, not the old technology, the new technology, you can check all of those boxes. Department of Energy in the U.S. just allocated a budget of $283 million for transitioning oil and gas tech into geothermal, if that gives you an idea. And they're also estimating geothermal will cost less than natural gas by 2035. So that's where we're headed in the industry in general. Why oil and gas? Well, if you were to look at most of the significant technology categories in oil and gas, that is what geothermal is using, right? So a lot of crossover tech from oil and gas into geothermal. The most common geothermal being developed right now will not work in Nova Scotia. That's called EGS, or an engineered system, where you inject water or a geofluid that's good at soaking up heat. You inject it into porous or fracked rock, and then you pull it to the surface. Okay, so that is where most of the activity globally is happening. We're more aligned with a closed loop system, which is cleaner environmentally and it's more predictable, but you have to get into hotter rock for that to work. So it's a pipe in hot, dry rock. There's no interaction. other than pulling the heat into the pipe and flowing that heat to the surface. There is a Canadian company that is having great success doing that right now. They just got a $100 million grant, or 93 million euro grant from Germany, from the European Union. They just drilled a 6-kilometer hole very quickly in New Mexico that is becoming a geothermal plant. They just won a huge contract in California. So this is the technology that we're talking about. Our adoption of that technology is very similar, although they have a separate cold pipe and a hot pipe. And we're more aligned with this pipe inside of a pipe technology because we're buying into something that Ever was talking about. Now, Ever was talking about, you'll see on the right, they're talking about the importance of attaining a sublinear or linear cost per meter when you're drilling down. So the further you drill, the less expensive it becomes instead of more expensive. Right now, it's more expensive, which is the only reason geothermal hasn't taken over the energy industry. So if you have that as part of your business model and you're assuming that you can attain a linear sublinear cost, then drilling straight down makes more sense than drilling laterally. The above ground tech is really a cookie cutter solution you can buy off the shelf right now. If we were to look on the diagram, so you use a quick way to explain it is Rankine cycle plants generate 85% of the electricity globally. Okay, and so it's altered somewhat in an organic Rankine cycle plant. You use a heavier molecule like butane. So the butane would pick up heat in the heat exchanger. It expands when it gets hot, drives the turbine, and then goes back into the heat exchanger. It's a closed loop, so there's no emissions. Where does the heat come from? Comes from the ground. Okay, so that's the idea, and the one that we're pursuing is, again, a closed loop system because it's very clean, very predictable, and you can build a low cost of money financial model around it because it's predictable. So those are the elements we were looking for. So what do we need to be able to build a closed loop system in Nova Scotia that would work? Well, you need a closed loop system on the surface. You need a closed loop system downhole that works. We have that. That's attainable. We can just buy that. What's missing is drilling down to 15 kilometers. That's what we need for a predictable outcome, right? So that is the key of what my company, and that's the challenge that we're taking on. So in order to be able to drill the 15 kilometers, you need to eliminate your bottlenecks. Right now, the oil and gas industry does not eliminate the bottlenecks, they tweak them. You need linear, sublinear costs, you need a reliable speed, you need a fixed cost per meter contract, and you need insurable contracts. That's what we need for geothermal to take over. Why do we want geothermal to take over? Because it is everything we want in a clean energy. It's stable, super clean, super small, very environmentally friendly, right? It's worth it. So what do we have so far? Well, we have the 2 closed systems that you can buy off the shelf. We unfortunately have bottlenecks. We can't get a linear or sublinear cost yet. We have reliable speed. They're going 5 to 10 times faster than they were 10 years ago. So the drilling tech is advancing very quickly. We were offered fixed cost per meter contracts from several of those advanced drilling companies. And we are close to having an insurable product, but it's not on the table yet. So that's where we're at so far. And the reality is, if we were drilling to 15 kilometers, well, we wouldn't have a reliable speed. Nobody's doing that yet, and we would not have fixed cost per meter. Okay, so that's where we're looking right now, and those are the problems our company is set to solve. Why are we so confident we can solve it? All of the required technology, all of the underlying technology required is available. It just needs to be brought together in one project with a budget and with a price point and an ecosystem that needs the energy, right? We need to build a model where we can afford to do the engineering. That basically is the solution that we're bringing to the table. So it's a very similar approach to how Elon Musk handled Tesla and SpaceX. It's exactly what he did. He just brought all the best technology available into one project and optimized the engineering, and that's how we took a jump forward of a couple of decades in development. So in Nova Scotia, we need, what do we have? We have 29 degrees Celsius temperature gradient. That's what we call a moderate zone. It's not a hot zone, but it's not cold either. It's a pretty decent temperature gradient. It's granite rich, like we have a lot of good magmatic rock in Nova Scotia that is good for thermal conductivity. We have huge grid deficits projected for 2030. I'm not sure how read into that the council is, but it's huge and there's no solution on the table that can solve it currently. The price point that we require is $100 per megawatt hour, and that will be one of the least expensive. It would be the least expensive option that Nova Scotia would have, like clearly.
Kevin, I'll get you to wind it up, please, if you don't mind.
Pardon me?
Your time is up, so just to finish off, please.
Sure. And so in order to get through the regulatory pathway changes that are required, doing things in a little bit different order, which we've been in discussion with federal and provincial counterparts. We have support. We have support from CIB. They've, indicated this week that they'd be happy for us to go and let the province know that they're interested in talking about our project. They understand all about it. We meet all the gates required other than Nova Scotia bringing it forward. So, we have some support at the federal level, and now we're looking for the support we need from the provincial and municipal level. And so that's why we're asking for the level, just to provide some political comfort for the politicians or legislators who need to stick their neck out a little bit to do something differently.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. I see that Councillor Lovelace, you have a question for the presenter. Councillor, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thanks so much for this presentation. Happy to always stick my neck out for change. It's interesting to see how fast Evar has moved, just, not nationally, but internationally, and their success in Bavaria is, I think should be noted. The provincial government in Alberta has said, this is great. They initiated legislation to ensure that not only that the technology and the company could succeed, but there was an opportunity for sustainability within the energy system. So looking at ways to address our independence, I guess, and remove oil from the equation is a good opportunity for us to move towards sustainability. And, in thinking about your presentation here and your ask, which is that the municipality move forward to the province with a letter in support of this technology, and obviously it would require provincial legislative changes. I also would encourage you to speak to the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities if you haven't already, because this is an issue across Nova Scotia, not just here in HRM. But certainly it would be nice to have this. I'm a board member of Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, so I'm thinking this would be a really good presentation for other municipalities to hear and to learn from. Rather than going to all 49, you can hit them all at NSFM. But I want to understand what you meant by an insurable project. I'm thinking that, clearly there is a precedent that's been set in Alberta for, the insurability of these projects. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit as far as, are you saying that there is an issue still nationally, or is it provincially from an insurability perspective?
Well, I'm a finance guy, so it's my way of saying that we can reduce the cost of money if we obtain a cost per meter contract that's reliable and we have the technology to reasonably solve the problem. and then we can sell the risk to someone who will buy the risk
Gotcha.
more affordably
Right.
than if we're doing it through the equity side. So there's a lot of waste I found in the energy industry, and that is one of the areas for a new emerging tech, a way of suppressing it,
Right.
is just making the risk too expensive, and it doesn't make sense, right? So, for example, I know Lloyd's of London is already, well down the path
Yeah.
towards ensuring this fast drilling, advanced drilling tech
Right.
with a company we're interested in. I'm pretty sure we can obtain that, and that would help really keep the cost down. Now, the thing is, the cost of money on the asset in renewable energy is almost the entire cost of energy,
Right.
right? Because there's like very little maintenance
Yeah.
and there's no fuel,
Right.
right? So
Okay.
it's a really low-cost operation. It's all about the cost of the asset.
Well, colleagues, this is very, very exciting. And kudos to Ever, Canadian company, who's just paving the way, or I guess drilling the way, for this renewable energy. Thank you so much for this presentation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morris, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Mullen, for your presentation. I'm just wondering if you could clarify a few things for me. It sounds like this is an energy source that Nova Scotia has a lot of advantages for, since we have so much granite. So if you could just talk a little bit about, where the ideal locations would be. And I'm having trouble understanding what type of facility, or what would be ideally connected with this type of energy source. Are we talking about it being for a factory, being for a municipal application, or what sort of facility would be attached to this energy source? And if you could say a little bit more about those energy deficits that you mentioned, and how this fits with that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. First, Nova Scotia really is not an ideal location to build geothermal. We have 25 to 29 degree per kilometer of depth geothermal gradient. So we have some warmer areas, they're like 29 degrees, like Spring Hill. And we have some areas like the South Mountain Batholith that are magmatic right to the surface, which is great for what we're doing. But the reason we chose Nova Scotia is really the ecosystem situation. Nova Scotia can offer to pay $100 a megawatt hour with no risk, right? There's no risk. If we're not successful, they just don't buy the power. So if they offer us a power purchase agreement of $100 an hour, that is like a good deal in Nova Scotia right now. And that is not that common, that you have that opening. That is, to put that in perspective and answer another one of your questions, is 10% of the Nova Scotia's current usage, consumption of electricity. That is what our pilot would produce, right? 120 megawatts, and because it's so high efficiency, it's 95% capacity factor, it produces 1 terawatt hour a year. Nova Scotia uses 10 terawatt hours a year, but we're going to need to double that very quickly, especially with hydrogen production.
Okay, if I could just interrupt if you don't mind. So we don't have any geological advantages whatsoever? It's just that our energy is already so highly priced that this would be an advantage? Is that what we're saying?
Realistically, yes. However, it's not the worst either, right? It's not anywhere no other developers are going to come here because no one else has our business model approach, right? But we're coming here because there's a moderate geothermal zone and the need and the price point is correct. And it's a small enough government where I have some access to legislative decisioners, and it's possible that this could come together.
Okay, that's a lot more clear, thank you. But I also was wondering what would be attached to this energy source. Like, is it ideal for a municipal application, for housing, or for manufacturing, or what would you say?
So the temperature coming out of the ground that we're shooting for will be above 300 degrees Celsius. And so you can use that, you can use the heat if you like. You can use it for energy storage because it combines very efficiently with thermal energy storage, which is quickly becoming by far the least expensive way to store a lot of energy, right? So if you're just storing 4 hours of energy, batteries are more competitive, but if you're looking at a few days of storage, thermal energy is very simple tech, very cheap to build. And geothermal, of course, there's a bunch of savings in doing those two as a package. So the heat can go to energy storage, farming, or housing, or buildings, or it can be for power. And what we're suggesting initially is power, because we need that government level $100 a megawatt hour.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Much clearer to me now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Vice Chair Daigle Gammon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So more than a few years ago, we were looking at building a facility in the Burnside Industrial Park, and we did some research around geothermal energy to see if that would be the right way to go. And that was where I first learned a little bit more about geothermal energy and exactly what you said. And so as you were presenting, I was listening, I was thinking, but Nova Scotia isn't it? Like, everything that I've learned has said that Nova Scotia is not the best province, partially because of the, ocean around us and all of that kind of stuff. But, so when you said, coming here, so you're coming here from where? Like, where is your company based out of? I'm just curious. And then what would you perceive to be your competition in this industry? And I really appreciate when you said, you come from the finance guy, because if I was thinking about the geothermal energy, it was always about what is the most efficient, what is the most clean, that kind of stuff. So to support your request to say, ask the mayor to write a letter, I feel like there's still not enough information. I almost want to take your report, go do a little bit of homework, talk to our Shannon Miedemeyer behind you there, and our environment group to really understand a little bit more about the impact of HRM signing something for a product that may or may not be what this province can use well, or maybe even to what extent do you think that there's enough energy that could be produced?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on that. So it's a good point, and I think that's what the importance of the no downside part of our proposal is. We're not asking for money from Nova Scotia to do this. What we're saying is this is a scenario where we can bring in the best technologies from around the entire world to participate and build an optimized, engineered, deep drilling system that will open up geothermal globally. And it's hard to do in a hotter zone where you have maybe 40 or 60 or 100 degrees per kilometer, and because you have a lot of competitors in those areas, and you won't get the price point that you need. So we need to do it here. But once we do it here, the second plant we build, which is an important point, which I thank you for forcing me to remember, is by the time we build our second plant, it'll be $50 a megawatt hour. That'll be the least expensive source of energy that Nova Scotia has, including fossil fuels. It'll be less expensive than nuclear power or anything like that. So what our target is to build it and be able to sell for 50 or 60 in our first pilot, but we have a very large contingency up to $1 billion. So we're expecting to spend 500 or 600 million, somewhere in that zone, and have contingency up to $1 billion just to make sure that we're successful on the first try. And after that price point will be 50. And then if you're talking about propelling a region into a highly advantageous scenario, then Nova Scotia would have more, as much power as they wanted, basically at a time when all our surrounding regions are scrambling for clean energy. I can't access it. It's stopping their industrial development. Like, even if you just look at hydrogen development and how big that can become without affordable energy, and then you consider data centers that use 1 or 2 terawatt a year that we're pushing away because we don't have the power to feed them. Well, we have the 3rd fastest cable across the ocean right now. It goes to the UK, the other 2 are to France. Well, we can't build a data center on this side because we don't have that kind of power, right? So this will be a huge boon to Nova Scotia if we do this. We can do it fairly quickly, but it has to be done in the right business model where it's profitable on the first time. That's something we can't get around for that size of money project. It's too difficult to get energy contracts to spread it out over several contracts. That's why it moves so slow. So if we can get the one model where we can pay for everything and it's profitable in the first time you do it, and Nova Scotia just happens to have those economic conditions. It's not the only place in North America. There's a handful.
Thank you for that answer. It helps me. I get that you're not asking for any money, but a letter is an endorsement of your company. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Next is Councillor Lovelace for a second time around. Floor is
Yeah,
yours.
just very quickly,
Sure.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just say that, when you consider how wind power got started in Nova Scotia, it's not very different from what's being proposed here. Folks who wanted to have a wind turbine on their property couldn't. They weren't permitted to. There were land use issues. There were issues with, there were no regulations. The early adopters were the ones screaming to get this, adopted throughout the entire province. And it wasn't until there was legislative change which permitted the municipalities to have the means to permit them, to do the land use bylaw reviews and so on and so forth. I think what we're talking about here is a new model to permit the development of these leases, the development of the technology, the development of the relationships as well, as far as all of the different orders of government coming together to advance this industry here in Nova Scotia, which they've already done in Alberta, and in Europe, which, they, of course, are in a very different situation, especially now with the war and access to energy there. So I'm excited about this, and I will just say that I think for Councillor Daigle-Gammon, the step would be to actually get a staff report that would provide us with the opportunity to understand whether or not the mayor is in a position, or council is in a position, to endorse the development of this new technology, which I would be happy to make that motion that I'm not prepared to right now because I don't have the wording of it, but I do think that it's time for us to move faster when it comes to adopting energy, and look forward to having our conversation on energy chargers shortly. But certainly, Mr. Mullen, I really appreciate your presentation, the time that you've spent to come forward to speak with us. But I do hope that you move forward with the other municipalities as well, because the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, needs to hear this presentation because we are all struggling with this same issue when it comes to not having the sustainable energy sources that we need. And just thinking 3 days, right? 3 days storage, like, wow. So massive power outage, for example, and you would be able to sustain whether it's residential systems or municipal buildings, what have you. So I'm excited for the future. And thank you, Mr. Mullen, for being here today.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Mullen, thank you very much. Great job first time in City Hall. Next time, don't forget the baked goods. All right, folks, thanks very much. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda. We're at number 11, information items brought forward. There are none. We're now at reports and staff reports. And as Councillor Lovelace just alluded, we are going to have 12.1.1 bylaw U100 amendment, electric vehicle charging fees. And I believe Kevin Butler is going to come forward. And Kevin, you have a presentation, I understand, so maybe we'll get the presentation up first, and then we'll get the motion on the floor, and then we can have some discussion.
All right, thanks folks. Always a pleasure to be here presenting to the committee. Also thrilled to present alongside Martha Horseman, who is an environmental professional and is the driving force behind the success so far and the progress that we're going to talk about with the EV strategy. So again, very pleased to be here today. We're going to give a refresher of the EV strategy itself, the Halifax goals that surround it, the progress to date, and then go into the recommendation, which is the user fees. So first, a quick reminder of the Halifax goals. Halifax, the Climate Action Plan, approved by Council in 2020. And the three key overarching mitigation goals are a 75% community emission reduction by over 2016 levels by 2030, net zero community emissions by 2050, and net zero municipal operations by 2030. And this wedge diagram shows the key areas of action that we need to support, lead, to get those emission reductions. And one of them is decarbonizing transportation. So in 2016, the transportation sector itself made up about 20% of our community-wide emissions, with light-duty vehicles making up 90% of that. While our plan does encourage, and we're trying to get people into active transportation, get them on the bus, encourage carpooling, the reality of our geography is that, especially in the short to medium term, commuter vehicles will still be required for many of our residents. So since that is the case, we do need to make Halifax an EV-ready city to make it easy for our residents to make that transition. We'll wait for red. Red means go.
Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. This is my first time stepping foot in City Hall, so I'm very excited to be here with you all today. So the municipal electric vehicle strategy was approved on November 21st, 2021. And at that same time, Council provided 2 additional recommendations indicating that 2 letters should be sent to the province from the mayor, one requesting the ability for HRM to mandate EV-ready parking and new construction within the municipality. EV-ready meaning that all of the electrical infrastructure is in place, all of the conduits, breakers, et cetera, just not the physical charger itself. And a second letter asking that the province strengthen their electric vehicle sales target to more closely align with those targets of Halifax. The 2022-2023 budget included $4.5 million in funding towards this strategy, and that is funded through the Climate Action Tax. Since the approval of the strategy, both of those letters have been sent to the province, and we're currently in discussions with our legal and planning teams to determine the next steps to implement EV-ready parking mandates in the municipality. We're also working to develop a white paper to help guide developers and provide them with the steps needed to install charging in both new and existing infrastructure. We're also partnering with the Next Ride program to provide electric vehicles test drives throughout the municipality. We're going to hold one in each district, and we're currently working on finalizing those dates and locations. So electrifying our municipal light-duty fleet will reduce those related emissions by approximately 60%. Right now, we have around 50 vehicles on order, either fully electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles. And we actually received just a few days ago 3 brand new electric vans, fully electric vans, which is very exciting. We're working to develop and implement an education plan for our fleet users to ensure a smooth transition to these electric vehicles. And we've hired a consultant to design charging infrastructure in the initial fleet deployment locations. So as Kevin mentioned, the transportation sector is responsible for approximately 20% of the community emissions in HRM, and a very large section, 90% of that, is from light-duty personal vehicles. This means that encouraging the transition to electric vehicles is a critical part of reducing our emissions in HRM. Deploying electric vehicle public charging is in alignment with what other municipalities are doing, such as Victoria, Montreal, and Toronto. And the goal of this is to ease range anxiety and speed the transition to electric vehicles by filling gaps in the existing charging infrastructure. We currently have a public RFP that is out for the supply and install of this public charging infrastructure, and that closes next week on April 14th. So this map that you're looking at here shows the areas that we are targeting to install public charging infrastructure. Those large red circles indicate the areas that were identified in the electric vehicle charging strategy. And the smaller green dots represent the 8 sites that we've confirmed so far as being the first places that we will install electric vehicle chargers. And those locations are in Hubbards, Tantallon, Halifax, Dartmouth, Bedford, Cole Harbour, and Musquodoboit Harbour. We're actively working towards confirming additional appropriate sites in the remaining locations, which includes both Upper and Middle Musquodoboit, Enfield, Sheet Harbour, Tangier, and Terrence Bay. We're looking to install approximately 18 sites over the next 2 years, and we're hoping to get started later this summer. The infrastructure that we're going to install will include both level 2 chargers, which will be designed to give those without access to their own at-home charging, access to overnight charging, as well as they will be used by individuals who will be spending, let's say, a couple hours in a given area. That's the kind of charger that they would likely plug into. And the fast charging infrastructure that we'll be installing is designed to mimic more of a gas station-like experience, so users of those can expect to gain around an 80% charge on an average EV in approximately 20 minutes.
So when those chargers are installed, without haste and without any issues at all, there will be operating costs associated with that. So the operating costs can be classified as both fixed and variable costs. So the fixed operating costs include an annual service fee, so that is pretty standard across the industry. You pay a service fee to the manufacturer in exchange for payment collection, monitoring, software upgrades, and so forth. There's also going to be maintenance, which will include snow clearing, which will be done by either our internal HRM employees or we'll contract that out, and inspections, which could result in somebody needing to go out and flip some breakers or check to make sure the charging heads are in working order. In addition to that, there's also variable operating fees, which are much more difficult to calculate. So one of those variable operating fees is transaction charges. So that's similar to you go to the grocer and you pay with a credit card. There's something that's taken off the top to use that credit card. So each of the manufacturers does have a transaction fee, but more difficult to predict is the cost of electricity that's going to be used for these chargers. So the cost of electricity is going to depend on the amount of utilization of those chargers. Currently, Nova Scotia Power does not have a set tariff for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So the actual cost of electricity is going to depend on the annual usage. And based on the package that Martha mentioned with the fast charger and the 2 slower level 2 chargers, depending on utilization, we're going to straddle 2 different rate codes. So if we get up to about 6% utilization on average, we're actually going to see demand charges be introduced. So we need to account for those demand charges. So on the next couple of slides we'll show what the proposed rates are and the operating costs, and you'll see that they range between 0% utilization and a 10% utilization rate. And 10% is that higher band, and the reason for that is due to a study that was recently completed by Dalhousie that stated that utilization at a charging station above 10% throughout the course of a year actually results in lines and waiting, and that adds to a negative experience. So we do not want chargers to be in place and people have to wait to use that charger. That really defeats the purpose. So with the service fee that we're paying the manufacturer, we'll be monitoring and we'll be able to determine which sites are very popular, which sites are seeing more than that 10% utilization rate, and then consider adding additional chargers in those locations. And a 10% utilization rate is only 2.5 hours per day. Yeah, next slide, please. So with that, we are looking at proposing user charges of 3 cents per minute for level 2 chargers, which results in about $1.80 per hour, and 75 cents per minute for fast chargers, and that is $45 an hour. And I would, put that into context. With the fast charger, 175 kilowatts is one of the fastest that you'll see here in Atlantic Canada. And you can receive an 80% charge in about 20 minutes. So I think it's really important to put that $45 an hour into context. People will not be sitting there for the full hour. And that actually, if they want to sit for the full hour, that will entice them to move along and let somebody else, move in and use that charge. So when we compare those costs across Nova Scotia or even Atlantic Canada, level 2 is fairly easy to do so. You're looking at about $1.50 to $2 per hour is the standard. However, with the fast chargers here in Nova Scotia, most of the capacities is really about 50 kilowatts, and you're looking at about $15 an hour for that. We're looking at 175 kilowatts, so over 3 times the capacity. And you can't just compare, hey, what are they charging in BC or what are they charging in Quebec, because the cost of electricity is much different. So the recommendation that's before you is the best estimate to cover our operating costs for putting these chargers in. A great little comparison. 75 cents a minute for the fast chargers. If a vehicle charges there and gets to an 80% range, it's going to cost about $15. I did the math, and to get the comparable range on a standard gas vehicle, you're looking at about $40 in gas. So even though we're looking to cover the operating cost, it's still much more cost effective. Next slide, please. And with respect to enforcement, so these chargers, in the bylaw you'll see there is enforcement related to this. There's a phenomenon called icing, where some folks that are not fans of EVs are just unaware. They will happily park with their internal combustion engine and park in an EV dedicated spot, and we want to prevent that, right? We want those to be available to folks that are looking to get a charge. So each site that we install, we're going to have clear signage. There's going to be a no parking sign, the standard no parking sign through the Motor Vehicle Act, with another sign below it that says except while charging. It will likely be complaint based, and however, if folks are icing and park there without charging, they will be subject to a fine and potentially towed. So this slide here, what we're showing is the estimated operating costs on the lower and the upper bands for the fiscal year 23-24. As Martha said, we're looking to get probably 8 sites hopefully installed by the summer. So with the sites that will be installed, the operating costs, if nobody touches them and they just sit there and collect dust, will be about a deficit of $26,000. If we do achieve the 10% utilization rate that we're looking for, we would see a small surplus of about $20,000. In discussion with finance, the potential deficit would be absorbed by our property, fleet, and environment budget. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the recommendation before you is that the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee recommends that Halifax Regional Council adopt the bylaw and as set out in the attachment. And Martha and I are more than happy to take any and all questions related to this or EVs in general.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. Martha, great job. First time here. See, we didn't bite so far, so we're a friendly group. Well done, both of you. I have lots of questions, but first I'll go to the committee, and Councillor Lovelace, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'll put the motion on the floor. I move that the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council adopt bylaw U-113, amending bylaw U-100, the user charges bylaw, as set out in attachment 1 of the staff report dated April 3rd, 2023.
A second by the Deputy Mayor. I heard.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this, Martha, Kevin. It's been an awful lot of work getting to this point. And so I completely understand, many of the issues. The first thing I was going to say about Hubbardston 10 Talon, great location, but we can barely get our compliance folks out there now. So thinking about the icing and people parking there, that is going to be a significant concern. I think there's definitely an educational issue, lots of work to raise awareness about the complaint process. If signage is clear around how people complain post 8 p.m., I think is important too. So I just have to ask this question about the locations, because one of the things we've been struggling with in Peggy's Cove is that question around, well, how come, with all that provincial infrastructure work, there were no chargers, no EV chargers that were considered. The province came back and said, yeah, we didn't really think it was needed. We've got, close to 1 million people going to Peggy's Cove every year. So along that loop, it would be great. I think I heard you mention Terrence Bay, which is good. But when we think about the work that the province has undertaken to, I think I'm quoting here now, committed $4 million over 4 years to expand the provincial EV fast charging network. So I'm just wondering, what are we doing with them? Because they're off I feel like they're off doing their own thing. We're off doing our own thing. I want to make sure that, we're all looped in as far as where that fast charging network is, because at the end of the day, we're going to have folks from Chester, Bridgewater charging at the Hubbard station. So I just want to be really clear about what, are we distributing this network out? I know we're starting with 8 locations. We've got a plan to advance, but the other thing I was going to ask you about is staff. Obviously, we've electrified our fleet, so we want staff to be able to go to these EV charger stations and charge up. And so just trying to understand from an efficiency perspective, knowing that our vehicles that are near these charging stations are going to be electric and have the opportunity to recharge. And the other question I have is around taxation. And is there anything coming down the pipe from the province or the federal government as far as adding a tax on to these EV charging stations, similar to what we see with gas? Has there been a conversation at the province with regards to adding, a 7, 8, 15% tax, whatever it might be, on energy? Just wondering where that conversation has gone. And I think that's all my questions for now. But I guess the other thing is just thinking about, the time of day usage. So it would be great if people were actually charging, post 8 p.m., but you wouldn't want them to, leave their car there overnight kind of thing. So just wondering how we're going to mitigate that and ensure that folks are going there, charging and leaving. Thank you.
For sure, some great questions through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So, and Martha, feel free to hop in to fill in the gaps. But with respect to the province, so once a month we do meet with our provincial counterparts to discuss the EV charging. We have Nova Scotia Power in the room, the folks at Nextride as well. There are some sites within that map that we do not have great municipal lands that we own. So we're working with the province to see if we can come up with a partnership, whether we lease parking spots in some of their facilities, or we help them actually install the infrastructure themselves. Okay. Yeah, so that one in Terrence Bay, it might take a little bit longer, and that's why we're looking at the St. Margaret Centre, where, in a way, you got to kind of go past it to get to Peggy's Cove, right? So that's sort of our initial idea on that. So with respect to our municipal fleet and the staff members, so the chargers that we do plan to install for public, in the tender, we are hoping that we receive chargers that will be open to using a fob, that we can give our fleet vehicles a fob. So it would be similar to, you're out in Sheet Harbor.
Okay.
You need to go to a gas station, that they can do that. We are designing, though, our fleet charging so that it will accommodate the full day's travel of a vehicle. So we are hoping that they never have to utilize a charger in Hubbards or in Sheet Harbor, but they will be able to use that should that be a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. And the tax, has there been a conversation about taxation on energy?
So not.
We timed out.
Yeah, timed out. Not at this time, no.
Okay.
I've heard, the stories that you've mentioned. I have a great article about the gas tax, and, because we've gotten there's some misconception as to where that gas tax actually goes, and like, hey, if people are driving EVs, they're not paying a gas tax, and who's gonna, upkeep our roads? So I'll be happy to send that to you offline.
Yeah, I think we need to address myth.
Yeah, 100%.
thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And we're working with the Next Ride folks, with the Clean Foundation, with that EV test drive circuit that Martha had mentioned, to have a full myth-busting document that we're going to make public, put it on all our socials,
Oh, great.
so that we all have consistent messaging when, the questions come up, which they will, and it's great that they do, so that people can be, we can educate and engage. So, yeah.
Thank you, appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I'm going to ask the question that just kind of got away there. We certainly don't, keeping with today's baked goods theme, the only place we want icing is on the baked goods, not in the parking lot. So I appreciate the bylaw change that's going to there to make sure that we can deal with that potential problem. I'm wondering about, is there some sort of strategy other than, just ticketing? Because the one that I would worry about, with the Alderney location is a great one, right? Someone's going in the market, they could charge their car up, or they're going into the theater, and that's fine. The one that I'm more concerned about is that someone shows up, plugs their car in, hops on the ferry, and then comes over here for 8 hours, keeping that charging location out of commission for the entire day, right? Basically, parking in the spot as if it's park and ride type thing. And so in that kind of situation, is that what we would be ticketing? Like where it was a legitimate charge, but then they sat there for hours?
Hey, Mike. Oh, I just came back online. I think that type of situation would be one where someone would plug into one of those level 2 chargers. We haven't set time limits in the bylaw to use these chargers. Essentially, as long as you're plugged in, you are able to use one of the chargers. But as long as you're plugged in, you'll be charged the user fee for these chargers. So if someone plugs into a level 2, they'll be charged that $1.80 an hour, even after their car, if their car does reach 100%.
Even if the car is not drawing electricity?
Yeah, they'll still be charged that fee.
Okay,
So
well, that'll be that'll help.
Yeah. So with the level 3 charging, with that, what essentially equivalents to $45 an hour, it's unlikely that someone would plug into that and vacate the area for several hours, because that would be a very expensive dinner or shopping trip to Halifax. So that is really what our level 2 chargers are designed for, to give people comfort that their car is being charged while they're doing their shopping or at work or sightseeing or what have you, without racking up that bill or filling up our fast chargers.
Yeah, okay. I hadn't pieced together that it was just when it's just being plugged in, even if it's not drawing electricity. I hadn't really pieced that together. I think that solves that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Vice Chair, you have the floor. Oh, sorry, Catherine, sorry, my apologies, right?
Oh, whoops, I was on there, but I just got deleted, and I know I'm a guest, and you can put me after, but my name just...
Yep, I'll bring you up next.
I am on.
So, Catherine, why don't you go first? My apologies, that was, she's a non-committee member, she goes last, so. Not that you're less important.
That's fine.
Clarify. Just to clarify.
Thank you, Tony.
We're good.
I was worried.
Thank you very much for this report. It's very exciting to see all the progress. Can you name the 8 sites?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Yes, I can. So our 8 confirmed sites include JD Shatford, Cole Harbour Place, 40 Alderney, the Canada Games Centre, the Bedford Park and Ride, the Armdale Rotary, and the Musquodoboit Harbour Library.
Okay, that's great. And I wasn't entirely clear on the costs. It's $26,000 per installation for each of the 8 stations, is that right?
So the operating costs would be $26,000 for those 8 sites for the remainder of the fiscal year. When they're installed in August is what we're predicting. We will come back to council in the next budget cycle when the other sites are installed. The actual capital cost of install is a bit more than $26,000. And that is where a portion of the $4.5 million that council approved through the climate action tax will go to.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does the operating cost include enforcement? Because I think there probably will need to be something there.
So the operating costs does not include enforcement. We spoke with Victoria Horn, Director of Parking, and they mentioned it could be absorbed within the budget. Yeah.
For the first 8, for sure.
That's correct,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And we'll, recalculate as more get installed.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Saving the best for last, Councillor Cottle. See how I saved the Deputy Mayor, how I saved myself there? You know
Good
something?
save, Tony. Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, this is exciting. I'm a little concerned because the $1.80 an hour that's cheaper than most street parking in places, and so I do get concerned that people will be using it as parking spot because it's cheaper and it's giving preference to people with electric vehicles. And there's a bit of an equity issue because we know that, most people who are buying electrical vehicles are probably higher up on the income scale than others. And so I'm a little concerned about where the parking spaces are located. Is it giving preferential parking access to people with electric vehicles, and how is that going to be perceived? And if it's cheaper than on-street paid parking where you can go and plug in for $1.80 an hour where other people are paying $3 an hour, I mean, I know we want to support 100% the conversion to electric vehicles, but for some people that's going to be a long time in coming in that they won't be able to afford an electric vehicle until we start to kind of, see them start to cycle through the resale factor and all the rest of it, which could be a long ways away. And so I do worry about, having the prime parking spots for electric vehicles and people in their nice, beautiful Teslas pulling up and paying less money to park there. Can you talk a little bit about that? And on the same subject, when you look at something like a park and ride in Bedford, I'm just wondering your thoughts about this. People go to a park and ride because they are there all day. Usually it's something that a commuter is going to use, a park and ride. You're not just there for an hour to dip into the library at the parking ride, or you're not, going to the store to pick something up or to have a coffee with a friend. You're usually at a park and ride for a long period of time. So I worry about, one, are people going to utilize it then because they're not going to want to pay the money all day long? Or I'm just wondering how that's really going to service the people we're trying to service.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So some good questions. With respect to the $1.80 for the level 2, for any location that is paid parking, they will pay both. They will pay for the parking and they will pay to use the charger itself. So down at 40 Alderney, they're going to pay the $2-3 an hour to park for however long they want to park, just like everyone else, and then pay the $1.80 for the charging session, as to make it so it is not, an incentive for the individual. With respect to the locations where there is no paid parking anywhere, so for example, Canada Game Center or all the other locations, the way that we've designed the charging infrastructure is to be as far from the building as possible. Again, we don't want to give priority to those individuals up close to the building. The best way to actually install the charging infrastructure is to find a high voltage power pole near the edge of the parking lot, and put the charging infrastructure there. So there will be no preference given to EV drivers in relation to optimal parking.
Okay, yeah, I think from a PR and perception point of view, that's wise, but it also seems to make sense to hook into your high power pole.
And in that way, we're able to track the electricity consumption, because we're going to have a brand new meter. We're not going to hook up to the building itself, the community center, because there's definitely a lot of admin work and reconciliation that would need to be done with, hey, who paid for what and where the electricity went. And it's quite invasive as well, to say, hey, we're going to dig into your J.D. Shatford library where the service is probably, 150 amps and it needs to be upgraded. So we're going that route. And then with respect to the Bedford Park and Ride, those are going to be level 2 sites, and they're not going to be, well, for one, there's going to be a ton of parking spots there, so people, they won't have to park there if they don't want to and they don't need the charge. And two, we're encouraging individuals to use the level 2s for a long period of time should they not have access to at-home charging. So in locations like Lacewood, Bedford Park and Ride, there's a lot of high density, a lot of apartment buildings where people wouldn't have access to charging otherwise, so we actually want them to utilize the level 2s and stay there for a reasonable amount of time.
Thank you. It seems very well thought out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Now we'll have the Vice Chair speak. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I'm a little bit curious about, was there any consideration given to a location around, and also around accessibility? Especially for, persons with mobility challenges.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Yes, that is something that we have been considering. Accessible electric vehicle charging spaces is very new. It's not something that's very common. Most of the chargers that you see around Nova Scotia currently are not accessible. There's accessibility considerations for charging that at this time there's no clear answers for, such as the cords can be quite heavy, they can be difficult to move around if you have physical mobility issues. So there's not a clear answer for making these 100% accessible yet, but we have taken some steps to make them as accessible as we can at this time. So we have given direction for these parking spaces to be designed wherever feasible in the width requirements for accessibility standard size parking spaces. And we're also including ramps or rolled curbs by the chargers themselves, so an individual in a wheelchair or with a physical mobility accessibility requirement would be able to still reach those chargers.
So what would the timeline look like when I think about installing these 8? And is there anything that we can do now that is going to just in terms of if I use a wheelchair and I come out of my car, like just the space itself, the parking space itself being a little bit bigger than a standard size? What are the things that we can do now that can just add value to later, like the next pieces?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So we are making the spaces wider, and we do have the ramp. So is that?
So are they just a little bit beyond the code for accessibility code?
So they align with the we'd have to get back to you on that exactly, but we did request that our consultant design it to meet, the width requirements of an accessible parking space so that individuals could get out and access the chargers. Is that?
Yeah, I'm just curious if maybe even coming to the Accessibility Advisory Committee, some persons with a lived experience about how they see the usage of the e-charging stations could be rather interesting, I think. Because even when we talk about just, what is barrier-free and what is code, and then the lived experience of actually using it, like you said, like the hose is a little bit bigger, and that means that maybe sometimes at the space you use to be able to take that and to charge it, to put it in your car sometimes. So those lived experiences, maybe the Accessibility Advisory Committee would have some interesting comments to make. Thank you.
I think
Thank you,
Shannon
Mr.
would like
Chair.
to comment on that. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, Shannon Miedema, Director of Environment and Climate Change. Kind of interesting view from up here. This is my first time up here covering for John. I just wanted to add that.
It could be a little lower for you. And I.
Yeah, I know, I'm like, I just wanted to add that I've had a really good conversation with one of the manufacturers of chargers in Canada recently, and the new charger that they're launching this year has actually they did really deep engagement with the early adopters to figure out what the barriers were and to try and really come up with a new, quite different solution, and accessibility was one of the key themes that they were focused on. So especially because they're more high-powered and the cord, like the giant hose, is a lot more heavy. Theirs is hydraulic, so that it actually, you don't have to be really strong. It's not as awkward to maneuver. And also, like the pay pad and the screen and everything you have to actually touch to do the charger is lower, so that you can be seated in a wheelchair or something like that. So they're thinking about that, and it's only going to get better as these companies keep honing in on continuous improvements. So yeah, we're really excited about those changes too.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I turn the floor back over to Councillor Morris, if you don't mind, from the chair, I have some questions. So it's interesting, full disclosure, we have a fully electric vehicle in my household, and it's been a great experience. And offline, I can share my experience when we first got it and tried a long-distance trip to Cape Breton, which was very interesting and challenging. At one point in time, we had 1% charge as we went into Antigonish. But anyhow, offline, I'll share that story with you. But it's interesting, Vice Chair, your comments about accessibility, because I think about that in the short time we've had our vehicle. I see many challenges. I mean, Kevin, I sent you a picture this morning when I charged up in Scotia Square. There's no way if you're in a wheelchair with those four chargers, you could even get close to that charging station the way it's set up. So good for you, and good question. The other piece is when you're speaking to the manufacturers, I don't know all of them do it, but there are some that have the notification that your vehicle is charged, and you get a text that your vehicle is now charged. And so I think it's important when you're looking at that tender to keep that in mind, because it addresses many of the questions of, not parking there all day. Interesting, Scotia Square, the first two charges at Scotia Square were free. And the Teslas were parked there all day long. Now they have 4 chargers, you pay, there's always a spot. Isn't that interesting? So I don't know what we read out of that, but that's a lived experience in that scenario. But they're always used. There's always someone charged, and I see different vehicles. So interesting. The list of locations, I was going to ask that was asked. I will suggest, I know Kevin, you and I chatted about Shuby Park, and I think that's a good candidate. I will also like to offer another possible location in Dartmouth, and that's at the East Dartmouth Community Center, which is also alongside Beasley Field, which contains 2 ball fields plus a track and field, one of our main track and field facilities. Very busy. This summer, Nagy Games, North American Games is there. And so it's going to be jammed there all summer, which is great, like much of the city. So whether we have an opportunity to do that this summer or not, I just think those would be a great location. Will we be doing any special promotion with our, with our EV chargers? I think there's great opportunity that just for the announcement of doing it, but also with Destination Halifax, with our hotels, with our restaurant, with our events. Nagy Games, here's our chargers, here's where they're located. I think there's a great opportunity to get the ball rolling. So I'll let you speak to that. Are you communicating with the bids? I think of downtown Dartmouth, I think of Village on Main, I think of downtown Halifax and Spring Garden Road, strategizing with them and even encouraging them, each to the bid should at least invest into one charger, I would think. And I didn't get in the presentation, but how many fast chargers? If you could, you may have mentioned that and I may have missed it. And I think those are my questions for now, guys.
Cut me off. Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. So the first one with regards to the comms plan, we are working with our comms team. We have a full comms plan that's ready to be rolled out. I will suggest that they also reach out to the hotels and the other organizations as well to collaborate, because if we get these chargers in before the summer's out, it's going to be great for tourist season and it'll see a lot of usage for sure. When it comes to the bids, through some of the councilors, I've been in touch with some of the different business associations. I do believe the technical paper that Martha is working on, or that mentioned earlier, will be really helpful for the different business commissions to help them, to guide them in a way to install charging, to understand what is needed and what's required. We're also working with Efficiency Nova Scotia, and they did just launch a rebate program for EV chargers and an EV ready plan. So if there's some condo owners or some multi-use residential building owners that are interested in investigating this, we're working closely with Efficiency Nova Scotia, and we'd be more than happy to help them out. With respect to the number of fast chargers, we're looking at 18. So each of the 18 sites will have a fast charger and 1 or 2 level 2s, again, depending on the amount of parking space. But when we do get our tender, when it does close on April 14th, it is a standing offer. So there is an opportunity to increase that and also to add some level 2s in locations that do seem suitable, like the East Dartmouth Community Center, Shuby, and others. Grams Grove's another one that we're looking at as well. So yeah, so send your ideas and we'll run it through the matrix and see if it comes out.
That's great. And just you mentioned about Efficiency Nova Scotia, the grants that they're offering. Are there any grants that you know of for just the residential homeowner? Because we're looking into it, and I'm sure there's others that are in it, but it's about a $500 install plus the equipment. I know that Quebec, I believe, the grant is you get to buy the vehicle. It actually includes a home charger also, but not here. And the other piece is interesting. Used EV grant, the grants that come from the feds, they don't apply it to used vehicles. The province does. So, which is interesting.
Correct, yeah. Here in the province, we do have incentives for vehicles, used and new, which I think incentives for used vehicles is incredible because it really, makes it accessible to, the masses, essentially, because there definitely is, a thought that EVs are Teslas and they're $100,000, and yes, that is what you see in the media, but there's plenty of used EVs that are within people's price range and have a range that people typically drive throughout the course of a day. With respect to incentives for actual charging and residential, I'm not aware of anything at this time. However, when our retrofit program does launch, we will certainly consider EV chargers to be included in that as well.
Great, thank you both. Next, Catherine Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've touched on this a little bit. It sounds like there are a lot of citing criteria that you run through. You have a matrix by the sounds of it. But I'm just wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit more why you might choose the Canada Games Centre over Keshen Goodman Library, which is across the street. On one hand, Keshen Goodman is kind of looked at as a bit of an exclusive place, that it's expensive to go there. Whereas the library is looked at as more of a community center, but the library parking lot is fairly small and Canada Games Center parking lot is larger. So I'm just wondering how you decide on the locations and what the criteria are on that, please.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. There is a number of criteria that we look at when we're choosing locations. The target areas determined through the electric vehicle strategy are based on the proximity and availability of other public electric vehicle chargers, as well as the density of the population, the presence of multi-unit buildings, lots of factors like that. And when it comes to choosing specific locations, we're looking for locations that HRM owns to make it a smoother install process, and only looking at locations that we don't own if there's no viable HRM options. And we're looking at the availability of parking is a large consideration. There's been a few areas that we've begun conversations with where when you say we're going to take 6 to 8 parking spots and they're going to be exclusively for electric vehicle charging, that can be a cause for concern. So the Canada Games Centre, where it does have such a large parking, such a great availability there, is really an ideal site. And we're also looking at the electrical considerations, so the availability of the power poles and whether or not those poles provided the required electricity.
Okay, that's much clearer. Thank you. So what we could expect the Canada Game Centre would be a station near the road, near the power poles, with 6 to 8 spaces. Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Cuddle?
Thank you there, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I guess where do we submit? We just submit suggestions to you, like if we have ideas about where they go. I had a question about the Terrace Bay one. Where in Terrace Bay? Out of curiosity.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, if I'm correct, Terrace Bay, Peggy's Cove, right?
Terrace Bay's in the Prospect.
Prospect, don't mind me. It's on the Peggy's Cove Loop, though, is it not?
Well, not really. Like Terrace Bay, you go along the 333,
Yeah.
and then you take the Terrace Bay Road, and you go down like a long road, I don't know, like 15 kilometers, and you
Right.
get to Terrace Bay at the end of a peninsula. So it's a bit of a strange location. But along the 333, you do have the Prospect Road Community Center, which is an HRM-owned facility. It's managed by a community group, but it's an HRM-owned facility. There's a big parking lot there. It's very popular. It's also the trailhead for the Western Common Wilderness area. So I would, Terrace Bay would be a weird choice, but the Prospect Road Community Center and Hatchet Lake, I think would be an ideal choice, and they have a big parking lot. And yeah, and you have people going in and out there to, play basketball or community meetings or whatever. So there's high turnover there. So for 1 hour to 3 hour chunks of time. I guess in Spryfield, there's none on your list for Spryfield, which I hope might be in phase 2. But something like the Captain William Spry Center, loads of people in and out of there with swimming lessons and libraries and community meetings. So again, like that kind of short 2 to 3 hour, or 1 to 3 hour kind of time frame of people being there. That would be a consideration. Or also I would suggest Graves Oakley Park, which is a regional park with that's used all year round. In the winter, there's cross-country skiing, there's a rugby club, there's rugby, there's baseball, there's tennis. So that would be a consideration too. Anyway, if I have any more brilliant ideas, I will pass them along. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's, I don't know, Kevin, if the intention is to, before we finalize those 8 sites, that to reach out to the councillors in those areas for the obvious reason. They'll know exactly that area very well, and so it will probably just confirm a later fine, but you even define one may not be the best site. I was questioning that too. I'm thinking, Terrence, yeah, great call, but it's tucked out of the way, and so maybe that's just before you finalize that, to have that conversation. Last item once we call for the vote here in a moment, this still has to go to regional council, correct? I encourage you to make sure that we have the same presentation, even though, and I look at the deputy mayor, at agenda review, it might get placed on the consent agenda, but we can always pull it off, but I would encourage that it doesn't. I think the presentation is important. The conversation is very good around the room, lots of education around the room on this, so make sure. Vice Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, I know you listed off the 8 locations, but where do we find those? I didn't see it in the report that was attached with the agenda, but where do we find them? And maybe when this goes to regional council, people might want to see what those 8 are. Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Deputy Chair. We made a conscious decision to actually leave it off the report because we were still in discussion with some of the locations and we didn't want to give people's hopes up, thinking that something's coming, and then we pull the rug out from under them. But we can definitely provide the locations, maybe via a briefing note. And to Councillor Cuddle's point, Spryfield's my home, so there's certainly going to be, we're looking at Captain William Spry. I believe they're doing some paving or something at some point, and we're trying to coordinate with the buildings group. They're doing retrofits there or something, so yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
No.
Seeing no others on the board, we have someone call for the question. Question's been called for. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That motion is carried. To both of you, thank you very much for that work. Very exciting. You can tell by all the questions from everyone. We're eager to get these out there and launched, and fantastic. So thanks very much. Let's move right along. Are there any motions from the committee? Oh, we do have a motion. Councillor Morris. Councillor Morris'
hello.
mic.
There we go. Just following up on our discussion earlier, I'd like to bring a motion related to that geothermal project that we heard about, if I could.
And I think it's on your screen, colleagues.
Yeah.
If Kay can blow that up for us
Well, we may as
older
well
folks,
just
there you go.
Keep it going while it's fresh in our minds. So I can read it. I move that Environment Sustainability Standing Committee direct the CAO to consider and provide a staff report and advice on a letter from HRM to the province of Nova Scotia in support of a request from GreenQuest to develop a clean energy geothermal project in Nova Scotia. So moved.
Do we have a second for that?
Not sure that was the motion, though, but.
So what you read was a little bit different from what's on my screen.
Oh, okay.
Just go
sorry.
to the screen. Do you see it, Councillor?
Sorry.
I'm not sure that we're ready for this motion.
Oh, okay.
Well, hang on, let her put it on the floor, then we can discuss it, yeah.
Sorry, I ran it
Yeah.
through the clerks.
Make your screen full.
Okay.
Right, want to try it again?
Sure, thank
Go.
you, sorry. So I move that Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to consider and provide a staff report and advice on a letter to the province of Nova Scotia in support of a request from GreenQuest at the April 6, 2023 Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee meeting to develop a clean energy geothermal project in Nova Scotia. So moved.
So I'll second that.
Okay, we have a second for Councillor Lovelace, and so I'll let Catherine speak first, and then you can speak to it. Go ahead, Councillor Morris.
No, I just thought that we could move more quickly on this because I think some of these projects it's important to be early adopters, and we know staff reports take a while, so I thought we could just get this moving sooner rather than later, and open to any amendments that anybody may have on this.
Councillor Lovelace?
Thank you. So I agree. I think that as I said in my comments, I think that we need to embrace this. My only concern is that they're not prepared to develop a project. This is just looking at the opportunity for legislative change to actually have a pilot project. So that's why I was wondering if we should just hold back and actually meet with staff first to ensure that we're aware of the legislative means to be able to do that. So the letter, I guess the staff report will encompass that, but I think that it should include the concept of pilot. Just to ensure that we're clear on what we're actually asking.
Clean energy geothermal pilot.
Yeah.
We okay with that?
Because really
Rick?
what they're looking for is legislative change of the province.
Yep, so we could add that to the mover and the seconder. I think agree that's friendly. You can add that, Katie? Good. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a process point, this committee to direct the CAO. Sometimes I've seen from committees that the recommendation go to regional council to direct the CAO. So maybe it's just a question for the solicitor in terms of what is the right process. I've often seen it say that it needs to go to regional council to direct, that standing committees don't direct the CAO. I just wasn't sure. For a staff report, it's good? Okay.
I think when the staff report comes back, they can provide the direction if it should go to regional council or not.
Well, see what the lawyers say.
Go ahead, Josh.
I think it's fine as worded that you can ask for the staff report.
Okay, sounds good. And I guess the question or the request that came from the presenter, to Councillor Lovelace's point, it was a letter of endorsement more than it was a pilot project, just to be clear with that. We don't add on to the ask of the presenter, maybe just it was a letter of support.
You communicated with them. So the understanding is, speaking to Shannon, that she had communication with them that it's not a pilot. No.
Right, so it's a letter of support.
So I think the staff report will investigate that. I think staff are here to hear that. So I think good conversation, good direction. I think they have the direction that they need. All right. Yep. So, Councillor Lovelace.
He used the word pilot because this is a new model that they are attempting to get up off the ground. And so if it is successful in Nova Scotia, it could be successful elsewhere. That was the impetus of my understanding. I'm just not sure writing a motion on the fly is helpful at this point. I just wonder if we should actually be taking a step back and sitting down with Shannon to ensure that, you know, what we're asking is what we actually need at the end of the day.
So Shannon, do you want to speak to, do you have enough direction here or do you need more?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think we have enough direction that you'd like us to really clarify a few questions and come back with a recommendation on whether you would like to recommend endorsing through a letter. And we can do that. In conversations we've had, this technology is not new, and it is happening in other places in the world, and it's not really, it's not a pilot that he's looking for. It is trying to mobilize the province to enable this type of project here, was my understanding. So I don't know if you want to keep the language of pilot in the motion. I think that probably doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter then. I think what's important is whether or not we would actually endorse it. We can't do that without the information in the staff reports. I just want to ensure that the direction to staff is adequate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great, nothing wrong with doing our due diligence, that's right. Good. Deputy Mayor, you have the floor.
Well, now I'm thinking, I don't know if there's anything worthwhile to add. I mean, I kind of liked Councillor Daigle Gammon's point that what he was asking us for was an endorsement letter. So what if we just deleted off the back end of the motion and just had and ended at Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee? And not even say meeting to develop a clean energy geothermal, delete the entire end bit, because really all he asked us for is a letter, and we still get the staff report back, and it's closer to what we were actually asked for.
Deputy Mayor, I'll ask, is that friendly for the mover and for the seconder? So, yep. So Katie, do your magic. She's done. So we're good? Question's been called for. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you very much, Councillor Morris. Are there any other motions? Seeing none. We're going to go to in camera. I know I said at the start of the meeting we would do public first, but there's nobody here, so let's can someone move for us to go into camera I believe we have to go into camera for this item. So moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Lovelace. All in favor? We're now going into camera. All right, thank you, Katie. We're back, folks, from in camera. So the next item on the agenda, could you put the motion on the floor, Deputy Mayor, please?
Sure. I move that Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee, one, nominate one water-related.
Sorry, that's the wrong one.
All right. I move that I move that Environment Sustainability Standing Committee, one, adopt the recommendations as outlined in the private and confidential report dated March 3rd, 2023, and two, direct that the private and confidential report dated March 3rd, 2023 be maintained private and confidential.
Second by Councillor Lovelace. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? And that motion's been carried. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any added items? Seeing none. Any notice of motions? Seeing none. Public participation, step forward. Please single file, don't rush. Seeing none. Date of the next meeting, if needed, June the 1st, 2023. Sorry? Well, so just before you adjourn, have a wonderful long weekend, everybody. Happy Easter, Buona Pasqua. We are adjourned.